grabbed my wrist so fast I nearly dropped my drink. I didn't know him. He was older, maybe late 60s. Silver hair, the kind of posture you only see in people who spent decades being told to stand up straight. He was wearing a dark blazer with a small pin on the lapel. I couldn't read it from where I was standing. He wasn't looking at my face. He was looking at my wrist. "Where did you get that?" he said. Not asked. Said, like the answer was already somewhere in the room and he just needed me to confirm it. "It was my grandfather's," I told him. He let go. He took one step back. And the color in his face, I can only describe it as leaving. Like something had been pulled out from underneath him. "What was his name?" he asked. I told him. He closed his eyes. "My grandfather died on a Tuesday in February in a care facility outside of Columbus, Ohio. He was 81 years old. He had lived in that facility for the last 4 years of his life, and in those 4 years, my parents visited him exactly twice, once when he was admitted and once at the end when the staff called to say it was close. I visited him every other week. I want to be clear about something. I am not telling this story to make myself look good. I am telling it because I have spent the last 8 months trying to understand who my grandfather actually was, and I think I finally do, or at least I understand enough. Enough to know that the man I sat with in that small room with the window overlooking the parking lot, the man who watched Jeopardy with the sound too loud and ate his pudding before his soup, was only one version of him, a late version, a tired version. The other version is the one I'm still learning about. His name was Leonard. Most people called him Len. He was born in 1943 in rural Pennsylvania, the second of 4 kids, and by the time he was 19, he had enlisted, done 2 years of service, and come home quieter than when he left. That's what my grandmother always said. She said he left talkative and came back quiet, and she married the quiet version because she thought it had depth. She was right. She just didn't know how much. My grandmother died when I was 12, so my memories of her are the soft, incomplete kind. The smell of her kitchen, the specific way she laughed at things that weren't that funny, the way she always tucked a tissue into her sleeve. She and my grandfather were married for 43 years. After she died, he kept going. He sold their house in Dayton, moved into a smaller place in Columbus to be closer to my parents, and then gradually, year by year, became someone my parents didn't know how to talk to. I think he reminded them of her. I think it was easier to visit less. I don't say that to be cruel. I say it because I watched it happen, and I never found the right moment to say anything about it, and that silence is something I carry. When he moved into the care facility, my mom said it was the best option. She said he needed more help than they could give him. She said he'd be around people his own age, that there were activities, that the staff were wonderful. All of that was true. The staff were wonderful. He did have people around him. But he also had a window overlooking a parking lot, and a daughter-in-law who called on his birthday, and a son who stopped by at Christmas with a tin of cookies he didn't ask for. And he had me. I don't know exactly why I kept going. Partly guilt, I think. Partly because I genuinely liked him, in the uncomplicated way you like someone who doesn't ask much of you and tells good stories about places they've been. He had been a machinist for most of his working life, or that's what he said. He talked about tolerances and calibrations and the specific satisfaction of making something that fit exactly right. He said most people don't understand precision. He said most people think close enough is good enough, and that close enough will eventually get someone killed. I used to think that was just machinist talk. He didn't have much when he died. The facility's social worker helped my parents sort through his belongings. There were clothes mostly, a few books, a photograph of my grandmother on their wedding day that had been on his nightstand since the day he arrived, a small wooden box about the size of a shoebox that had been in his closet on the top shelf. My mom didn't want the box. She didn't say it like that exactly. She said she didn't have room, that their house was already full, that I could take it if I wanted. She handed it to me the way you hand someone a bag of old magazines. Not unkindly, just without interest. I took it. I put it in the back seat of my car and didn't open it for 3 weeks. I told myself I was waiting for the right moment. I think I was actually just scared of what it would feel like to look inside. When I finally opened it, sitting on my apartment floor on a Sunday afternoon with the heat on too high and a cup of coffee gone cold beside me, I found the following things: a folder of papers in a language I didn't recognize, a photograph of 3 men standing in front of a building I couldn't identify, a small notebook with a water-stained cover, a folded letter with no return address, and a watch with a cracked face. And the bracelet. It wasn't flashy. That's the first thing. It was silver, plain, about an inch wide, with an engraving on the inside I had to hold up to the light to read. It wasn't a name or a date. It was a sequence, letters and numbers, arranged in a pattern that meant nothing to me. I put it on my wrist because it was the only thing in the box I knew how to hold. I wore it for months without thinking about it much. It became background. People occasionally asked if it was a medical bracelet. I said no, just a family piece. Nobody pressed further. In October, a colleague invited me to a fundraising event, the kind of thing where you wear business casual and make small talk over mediocre canapes while feeling vaguely like you should be networking, but not knowing how. It was held at a hotel ballroom downtown. The beneficiary was a foundation that supported retired intelligence community personnel and their families. I almost didn't go. I went because my colleagues said there would be an open bar and because I had nothing else to do that evening. I put on a blazer, took the bus downtown, and stood near the appetizer table trying to look like I belonged. That's where he found me. His name, I later learned, was Edmund. He had worked for a government agency for 31 years. He did not specify which one, and I did not ask. He was the kind of man who had answered enough questions about his work with the phrase, "I'm not able to discuss that it had become a reflex, a way of existing, something he carried without weight." When he grabbed my wrist and asked where I'd gotten the bracelet, I thought for one embarrassing moment that he thought I'd stolen it. "That code," he said, after I told him my grandfather's name. "That sequence on the inside." He paused. "Do you know what it means?" I told him I didn't. He looked at me for a long moment, like he was calculating something. Then he said, "Can we sit down?" We found 2 chairs at the edge of the room, away from the noise. He sat with his hands folded in his lap, very still, the way people sit when they are deciding how much to say. "Your grandfather," he began, "was not just a machinist. What Edmund told me that night, I've had 8 months to process. I'm still not sure I've done it correctly. My grandfather had enlisted at 19, yes. What he didn't tell anyone, not my grandmother, not my father, not anyone, was that his service hadn't ended when it appeared to end. He had been recruited shortly before his discharge into a program that no longer officially exists. It was a program that used ordinary civilians, people with no visible government affiliation, as conduits. Observers. Sometimes couriers. People who could go places and do things that credentialed agents could not, precisely because they looked like no one. A machinist from Pennsylvania. Who would think twice? Edmund had been, for a period in the 1980s, a handler. My grandfather had been one of the people he handled. He was extraordinary, Edmund said. Careful. Patient. He understood the value of being invisible. He paused. He also understood that it was permanent, that the work didn't stop just because the world changed. "What does that mean?" I asked. "It means he was active until 2009, Edmund said. He was 66 years old. I sat with that for a moment. "Does my father know?" I asked. "No," Edmund said. "That was part of the arrangement. Family members were not informed. It was a condition of participation. Did he volunteer for that condition?" Edmund looked at me. "He insisted on it," he said. "He said he didn't want the people he loved to have to carry it." I drove home that night in silence. I didn't turn on the radio. I didn't call anyone. I sat at a red light on Fifth Avenue and looked at the bracelet on my wrist and thought about my grandfather watching Jeopardy with the sound too loud, eating his pudding before his soup, never once saying anything about any of it. The sequence on the inside of the bracelet was an identifier. Edmund explained it to me briefly, not the full context, just enough. It was the kind of thing you wore so that if something happened, the right people would know who you were. It was not a military ID. It was something older, more informal, more deliberate. He had worn it for decades. He had given it up only at the end, when his hands got too swollen from the arthritis to get it on and off comfortably. He had put it in the box. He had put the box in the closet. He had never said a word. I thought about all the Sundays I had sat with him, all the times I had asked, in that vague, visiting the elderly way, "How are you doing, Grandpa? Is there anything you need?" And he would say he was fine. He would say he didn't need anything. He would ask about my job, my apartment, whether I was eating enough vegetables. He was fine. He never needed anything. He had already given everything there was to give, quietly and without documentation, and he had filed it away in himself so completely that there was nothing left to leak out. I thought about my parents' tin of Christmas cookies. I thought about my mother saying she didn't have room for the box. I didn't feel angry at them that night. I felt something heavier. I felt the specific sadness of realizing that the person you thought you knew was both more and less available than you understood, more extraordinary in ways you couldn't see, and more alone in ways you should have seen. I called my father the next morning. This is the part I want to be careful about, because it would be easy to tell this story as a story about my parents doing the wrong thing and being confronted with it. It would be easy to make them the antagonists. But that's not what happened, and that's not who they are, and I think that kind of story is less honest than the harder one. My father picked up on the second ring. He sounded surprised to hear from me. "I don't call on weekday mornings usually." I told him I needed to tell him something about Grandpa. He got quiet in the way he gets quiet when he's preparing for bad news. "It's not bad," I said, "or it's complicated. Just listen." I told him about the event. I told him about Edmund. I told him what Edmund told me, as carefully and completely as I could. My father didn't say anything for a long time. I could hear him breathing. "He was a machinist," my father finally said. "I know," I said. "I know that's what you knew." Another long pause. "He never said anything," my father said, and his voice had something in it I hadn't heard before. Not quite grief. More like the feeling of reaching for something on a shelf and finding it wasn't where you thought it was. "He didn't want you to have to know," I said. My father was quiet for another moment. Then he said, very quietly, "We should have visited more." I didn't tell him he was wrong. I didn't tell him it was fine. I said, "Yeah, we should have." That felt like the truest thing I could offer him. My parents drove up to Columbus the following weekend. Not for any particular reason. There was nothing to do, no grave to tend, no official anything. They just came. My father walked through the care facility parking lot and stood there looking at the building for a little while. I don't know what he was thinking, he didn't say. My mother cried, which I hadn't expected and which made me feel closer to her than I had in years. We went to the cemetery. We stood at my grandfather's headstone, which is simple: his name, his dates, a small American flag the facility had placed there at some point. My father put his hand on the stone. He stood there for a while. Then he said, to no one in particular, "I didn't know you. I should have tried harder to know you." That was it. That was the whole thing. 6 seconds. But it was real, and it was right, and I think my grandfather, whoever he fully was, would have said that was enough. I've been thinking since then about what it means to live the way he lived, to do something meaningful, genuinely, measurably meaningful, and to do it in complete invisibility. No recognition, no record, no one to say in any official capacity, "Thank you, we see what you did." There are people who say they'd be fine with that. I'm not sure I believe them. I think most of us want, at some level, to be seen, to have our effort witnessed, to leave something that someone will recognize. My grandfather didn't have that, or he had a different version of it, a small private version carried in a wooden box and a cracked-faced watch and a bracelet with a code no one in his family could read. He had me visiting every other week. He had my grandmother's photograph on his nightstand. Maybe that was enough. Maybe he decided a long time ago that it would have to be. Edmund reached out a few weeks after the event through a mutual contact. He said there were some things that could be shared now, given the passage of time. He said there might be a commendation, informal, nothing public, nothing that would appear in any document you could FOIA, but something. A record within the relevant community. A name in a file that said this person mattered, this person did the work. I said that would be good. I said my grandfather would have said it wasn't necessary. He would have, Edmund agreed. He always said it wasn't necessary, and he always meant it. But you're doing it anyway, I said. Yes, Edmund said, we are. I still wear the bracelet. I've had the engraving looked at, officially, by someone Edmund connected me with, and I understand now what the sequence means. I'm not going to say it here. That feels like his, still. Like the part of him that was never mine to hand over. But I wear it, every day. There are things I wish I had asked him sitting in that room with the parking lot window. I wish I'd asked him about the photograph of the 3 men, about the water-stained notebook, about the folder of papers in a language I still haven't fully identified. I wish I had asked him whether it had been lonely, or whether he had made peace with the loneliness, or whether those were even the right words for what he had done. I wish I had asked him, just once, how he was really doing. But I didn't, and he didn't say. And that's the shape of it, the space where the conversation didn't happen, the door that stayed closed because neither of us thought to try the handle. What I know is this. My grandfather was a quiet man from Pennsylvania who worked with his hands and watched Jeopardy too loud and never once asked for anything. He was loved imperfectly by his family, which is to say, he was loved the way most people are loved, with the best intentions and not enough follow-through. He kept secrets that were not his to share, and he kept them completely, and he kept them all the way to the end. And on a Tuesday in February, in a room overlooking a parking lot, he died. And in October, 8 months later, a man in a blazer at a fundraising event grabbed my wrist and the world rearranged itself a little. Not enough to fix anything, not enough to undo the Christmases with cookies, the birthdays with phone calls, the 4 years of parking lot windows, but enough to see him, really see him, the whole shape of him, instead of just the part he let us hold. That's the thing about people who carry their lives quietly. They don't make it easy for you to find them. You have to go looking. You have to be curious enough and patient enough and present enough to ask the question again when the first answer is, I'm fine. I wasn't with him. I was better than my parents, but I wasn't enough. I think about that. I'm trying to do something with it. I don't know if this counts as honoring him. I don't know if telling the story is the right thing or the self-serving thing or both. I don't know if he would want it told at all, but I know what the bracelet felt like when I put it on, like something that had been waiting, like something that had been held in reserve for exactly this, for someone who would keep it close without fully understanding it and wear it anyway. So that's what I do. I wear it anyway. I keep coming back to one image. My grandfather sitting in that room with the parking lot window, watching Jeopardy with the volume too high, eating his pudding before his soup. Nobody in that room knew what he had done. Nobody asked. And he didn't say a word, not because he was incapable of saying it, but because he had decided a long time ago that saying it wasn't the point. That decision, that's the thing I can't stop thinking about. There's a version of integrity that's loud. It announces itself. It needs to be seen to feel real. And then there's the version my grandfather had, the kind that exists in complete silence, that does the work and walks away and never once looks back to check if anyone noticed. Edmund told me Leonard insisted that his family not be informed, not as a hardship, as a choice. He wanted the people he loved to live freely, without the weight of knowing. That's not weakness, that's a specific kind of moral strength that most of us will never be asked to have, and would probably fail at if we were. I failed at a smaller version of it. I visited every other week, which was more than my parents did, but I still asked, "How are you?" and accepted "I'm fine," and moved on to talking about my apartment and whether I was eating enough vegetables. I had the information that something was being left unsaid. I could feel it. The way you can feel a room where a conversation isn't happening. I chose not to press. I told myself I was being respectful. I think I was being comfortable. Comfort is the enemy of knowing people. That's what I understand now. The people who matter most in your life will often give you an exit, a polite answer, a deflection, a fine, and it takes a conscious decision to refuse the exit and stay in the room a little longer. My grandfather did that work for his country for decades. His own family couldn't do it for him for an afternoon. I don't say that to punish anyone. My father stood at that headstone and said, "I didn't know you. I should have tried harder to know you." And that sentence took something out of him to say. That's real. That counts for something, even if it came late. What I've tried to carry forward is this. The people in front of you are almost always more than you can see. More complicated, more scarred, more quietly extraordinary than the version they show you on an ordinary Tuesday. That's not a mystery to solve. It's a reason to keep showing up, to keep asking, to resist the shortcut of "I already know who this person is." My grandfather built his whole life around precision. He said when he was still talking about machining, that close enough will eventually get someone killed. I think he meant it about more than metal. I think he meant that the work of paying attention, really paying attention, to the people you love, to the commitments you make, to the cost of your own silence. That work requires exactness. It requires showing up when it's inconvenient. It requires the willingness to sit in a room and not look for the door. He wore that bracelet for decades, no one to tell, no one to thank him, just the weight of it on his wrist and the knowledge that it meant something, and the decision to keep going anyway. I wear it now, same wrist, same silence around it mostly. But I'm trying to be better at not staying silent about everything else.